We're moving on to the end of the book of Acts, chapter 26, and Paul is still a prisoner. He's on trial now, once again. And we need to briefly look back to chapter 25, just to set the scene, which I spoke about a few weeks ago. Some of you may have seen the video that we did at the time. But Agrippa, another King Herod Agrippa, and his partner, his sister, his consort, Bernice, is with him. And I went through the background of King Herod Agrippa and the fact that he comes from a line of not very pleasant characters and was apparently not a very pleasant character himself. There's a history in his family of killing people right back to his grandfather, who was there at the birth of Jesus, killing all the children to try to get rid of baby Jesus at the time, or young child Jesus at the time. And Herod Agrippa and Bernice arrived into the town to see the governor Festus. And Festus is taking this opportunity to talk to him about the problem he's got with Paul. The problem he's got is that Paul has appealed to Caesar, and so he's going off to be tried before Caesar in Rome. And right at the end of chapter 25, verse 27, it says, "It makes no sense to send the prisoner to the emperor without specifying the charges against him," which is a bit of a problem. You send somebody to the emperor saying, "Can you carry out the trial of this person?" but don't actually know what he's done wrong. So, if you're going to send him to the emperor for a trial before the emperor, you need some charges. And Festus is really confused as to what those charges might be. And he's using this opportunity of having Herod Agrippa there, who is an expert in Jewish law and Jewish practices, and he can then give some advice on what Paul has actually done wrong to upset all the Jewish leaders so much. I did remind you last time that Herod Agrippa was not himself a Jew, but he was the king of the Jews. He was brought in, he wasn't from a Jewish family, but he was brought in by the Romans, and he was an expert. He had studied these people that he was ruling, so he did know the Old Testament, the scriptures that they had, and so he was there to listen to Paul. And I love the way this starts, because I want to start my sermon pretty much the same way. That Paul gestured with his hand in a good Roman way, and it didn't come across in the video there, but it's likely that his other hand was in chains, chained to the guard who was keeping him secure. Because the Romans had a practice of keeping the guard with you at all times, so you would be chained to the guard that is guarding you. And he would wave his one free hand and perhaps wave at the guard next to him that's chained to him. And he said, "I'm really, really fortunate, King Agrippa, that you're here in this defence today. I know you're an expert in the Jewish customs and controversies. You know what we're talking about. Now, please listen to me patiently." And that's how I want to start. Sit back, relax, take your time. I've got lots of things to say to you. So relax patiently and let's not rush this. This is an opportunity to hear all about God, and we're going to take our time about it. That's how Paul started. A wonderful opportunity to preach a sermon before the King of the nation. Let's not rush it. Let's savour the moment. And you would have seen in the video the servant there fanning him, keeping a nice relaxed atmosphere. If you've got somebody sitting next to you with a fan, perhaps they'll do the same for you. I don't know if that's allowed. I think it is under the COVID rules. So sit back and relax, and let's take our time here to think about God, to think about this story. There's no rush. It's great, isn't it? You can take as long as you want over sermons these days. It's really good. And so Paul then tells his life story. He goes back, talks about how he grew up. He became a Pharisee, a really strict observer of all the Jewish rules. He'd then been so enthusiastic for God, for the Jewish rules, that he'd been hostile to this new Christian thing that was coming around, and actually fought against the Christians, condoned their murder. And then it had that life-changing moment on the road to Damascus, when he'd not just seen a bright light, he'd met with Jesus. Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, who you are persecuting. A personal meeting with Jesus. And he was now sharing that, saying, I've met Jesus, I want to tell you all about him, I want to share that moment with you. And I think very often we think, if we can just get people to know what we know about God, then that would transform their lives. Just tell them about God. If they can meet God, that will obviously, they will then believe in him and follow him. And it's not quite as simple as that, because the story of the Bible is full of people that know all about God. The problem isn't getting people to know about God. And it goes right back. There's a story in Genesis, you'll be surprised to hear, that I would start with. In Genesis chapter 4, we have somebody who knows all about God, actually has conversations with God. We have Cain, the son of Adam and Eve. And Cain knows that God has a way of keeping people close to him by pointing them to Jesus through the sacrificial lamb that is going to take away the sins of the world. And as a foretaste of that, an acceptable sacrifice to God is the sacrifice of lamb, the shedding of blood. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness for sin. And that is the sacrifice that God is looking for. And Cain understands that. Abel understands that too. Abel brings an acceptable sacrifice. But Cain wants to do things his own way. He wants to say, I am a farmer and I am growing some really good crops, and my offering to you, God, is going to be the things I've done. He knew God. He talks to God. But he doesn't accept God's way of doing things. He doesn't accept the fact that God is providing the way to come close to him, the way to be acceptable to him through Jesus, through the sacrifice of the Lamb. And he doesn't do the offering the way God has told him to. And so you then move on through that story of Cain and Abel, that leads to a murder of the brother, through jealousy, the fact that his brother's offering is acceptable and his way of doing things isn't. So you have the first murder taking place. Next book of the Bible, we've got 66 of them, so we're working our way through nice. We're up to number 2. In the book of Exodus, we have the story of Moses with the Pharaoh. And the Egyptians are slaves in Egypt, and the Pharaoh does not want to let them go. And God shows his power. There can be no doubt that God is in control as you read the story of the plagues. Going right through all these plagues, when Moses keeps saying, look at this plague, let the people go. And Pharaoh keeps saying, maybe I will, maybe I won't, no I won't. Right through to the final plague, the Passover story, the death of the firstborn throughout Egypt. God shows in that night of death his power, his control. There can be no doubt that God is there in charge. And Pharaoh sort of changes his mind, says, yes, okay, you can let the people go, God's won. But when the word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled in Exodus 14, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done, letting all those Israelite slaves get away, they asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. The Lord hardened the heart of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so he chased after the people of Israel, who had left with fists raised in defiance. The Egyptians chased after them with all the forces in Pharaoh's army, all his horses and chariots, his charioteers and his troops. And the Egyptian chariots, led by the Pharaoh, caught up with the Israelites who are leaving their slavery. There can be no doubt that God is in control, and yet the Pharaoh wants to fight against God. Not because he doesn't know that God's there, He just doesn't want to do things God's way. And the story for him, we had the story of Cain, which didn't have a happy ending for Cain. It's an unhappy ending for the Pharaoh, because he did finally almost catch up with the Israelites in the middle of the place where the Red Sea usually is. And as the Israelites crossed over the dry land where the Red Sea usually is, the Egyptian chariots ended up in the place where the Red Sea was once again and drowned. Defiance of God, not because they didn't know about God, but because they weren't willing to do things God's way. Moving rapidly on, we're going to skip out a few books. I see a look of relief, but just sit back and relax. We've got plenty of time, it's okay. 1 Kings chapter 19. Just before 1 Kings 19, we have an incredible story on Mount Carmel, where there is a contest between the true God and the false imaginary god of Baal. And the prophets of Baal are saying, this is the God, we're going to prove it, and they're not proving it. They're meant to be lighting up this altar. And we have Elijah praying to the true God and showing that the true God is in control, and pouring all water over the altar just to make things even more difficult, and the fire from heaven coming down, starting the fire, showing I am God, I am in control. And then the sacrifice of death didn't end well for the people in charge of the Baal altar. They were killed. But Ahab and Jezebel, the king and queen at the time, hear about this story. They know that God has won. But when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you, just as you killed them. Jezebel, not in ignorance of who God is. She's heard from Ahab, there is no doubt who won that contest. There is no doubt who God is. Yet she says, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed Elijah, God's prophet. People don't need to know about God to follow him. They can know about God and decide they're not going to follow him. In fact, in James chapter 2, in that letter, it says, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Even the demons believe that there is a God. So, just knowing there is a God is not enough. So Paul is telling King Agrippa about God, but that's not enough. Agrippa says, do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? Or almost you do persuade me to become a Christian in some translations. There is some debate about whether he's saying, I'm almost persuaded, or whether he's saying it sarcastically. You're not persuading me. Or you need to do more. I need to hear more before I'm persuaded. Whatever his meaning, he hears and he knows the story of God. He knows the Old Testament. And he's saying, I'm not persuaded just by hearing that. Because it's not just about knowing God. It's about your response to it. It's not about knowledge, it's about relationship. It's about having a close relationship with God and following him and accepting Jesus as your Lord and Saviour in that personal relationship, which is to step on from the knowledge of God. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the knowledge is unimportant, because you can't have a relationship with someone you don't know. And once you know someone, you want to know more about them. You want to know them better if you're going to get into a deep, meaningful personal relationship with them. And in Luke 24, we've got the story of the walk to Emmaus, where Jesus is walking with two of his followers, shortly after his resurrection. And he's walking on the way to Emmaus, and as he walks along, it says, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have time to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. The scriptures he had to work with was the Old Testament. And Jesus said, let's have a look at the Old Testament, let's go through it, probably from memory, because I can't imagine he was carrying the 39 scrolls from the Old Testament with him. But he said, let's work our way through. Let's go back to Genesis. I imagine Jesus said that. Let's start with Genesis. There's some really good stories about me there. And he went through the stories in the Old Testament saying, well, look, this one's all about me. Look, when Abraham is going to sacrifice his son, that's an indication of me being sacrificed. Look, can you see the parallels? And he went through the Old Testament saying, this one's about me. Oh, there's a story about me here. Oh, look, rising on the third day. Well, that's the story of Jonah and the big fish. Came back to life on the third day. That was an indication there. And he just went through all the Old Testament, very excited, pointing all these things out, saying, haven't you spotted them? And that's when it gets exciting. In the story that we're looking at here, Festus shouts, Paul, you're insane. Too much study has driven you crazy. And I sort of identified a bit with that. But the study is quite exciting. When you're going back through the Old Testament, you spot another page that's all about Jesus in the Old Testament. And I don't think it's totally driven me crazy yet, but I'm on the way. And that's what Paul's doing here. He's doing the same thing as Jesus did. He said, listen, you know these Old Testament stories. You're an expert in the Jewish law, the prophets, the story of Moses. You know all this. It's all about Jesus. And he's taking him through, pointing some of these things. He said that it says in the Old Testament that Messiah would suffer and rise from the dead. He said, and probably we've only got a little bit of the story written there. He probably would have pointed to some of these passages. He said, let's look at the bit in this passage here where it's talking about Jesus rising from the dead. You know that story. Here's the link. Here's how it all fits together. And Herod Agrippa knows it. He can probably see the links. But it's not making him a Christian. Because just knowing about God doesn't make you a Christian. Even seeing the links and knowing that the Old Testament is all about Jesus doesn't make you a Christian. It's what you do with that knowledge. It's accepting that personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus that you've learned about, Jesus that you know about, Jesus that you are learning more about, you're understanding the stories about so you know him better. But you're accepting that he is in charge of your life, that he wants a personal relationship with you, and then you can become a Christian. So don't expect to convert people by telling them all about God. Don't expect to convert people by persuading them to become a Christian. Your job as Christians is giving people the opportunity to transform their lives themselves through the power of the Holy Spirit. To give them the knowledge about God, to introduce them to God so that they can have that relationship if they accept it. But you can't persuade people to become a Christian just by imparting the knowledge you have, even with the enthusiasm and excitement that you have when you recognise that these things are so exciting and true, and I just want you to see them. Because all through the Bible, in fact all through history, there are people that have heard the stories, perhaps people that believe in God, but aren't going to become Christians. They are going to be the Cains and the Jezebels and the Pharaohs in the world, knowing that God's there and actively opposing him. In fact, that's going to go right through to the end of time, because in the book of Revelation, you've got people saying, we are now going to fight against God. The fight really doesn't last very long, and the winner is a foregone conclusion, but it doesn't stop it happening. And so you come to this story, Paul's saying, okay, I would like you to become a Christian. I wish you were like I am, apart from the fact that I'm chained to this person next to me here. Don't really wish that on you. But apart from that, I would like it. But that's up to you. It's your decision. My job is to tell you this story, because it's a great story. My job is to tell you about my relationship with Jesus and to introduce you to him. What you do with that is not Paul's job, it's not my job, it's not our job. But our job is giving people that opportunity. And it's interesting, right at the end, having rejected the message, they're sort of saying, but Paul hasn't done anything wrong. He shouldn't really be on trial here. In fact, if he hadn't appealed to Caesar, then he would go free. Now, going free would probably be a death sentence for him, because there are all sorts of assassins lurking around to kill him in Israel at the moment. And going free wouldn't be part of God's plan now, because God's plan is to get Christianity to the heart of the Roman Empire for Paul to go to Rome. He could have been set free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. But he is going to go to Rome to take the gospel to Caesar. And they haven't actually resolved their problem. In fact, they've made it even harder. What are we going to put down as the sentence, or as the charge that's against him? Because they still really haven't identified anything he's done wrong. So they have a problem. But their bigger problem is the fact they've now heard about God. They've heard about Jesus, but they haven't decided to do anything with that knowledge, with that information, which is a really sad position for them to be in. And contrast them with their apparent freedom and the servants and the pomp and all the ceremony of the leaders of the nation, who are in the sad position, and Paul chained to a guard next to him, a prisoner, who's the person who's in a really happy position. Looking on from a worldly point of view, that's all upside down. You've got the king, you've got the Roman governor, you've got all their power, and you've got a prisoner. And the prisoner is the person who's got it all right. The prisoner who's got everything to be happy about. We're going to sing a song now, as we think about that. And it's a song that reflects our response to the knowledge. The knowledge about God could be head knowledge and say, yeah, I'm just going to oppose him, I'm going to fight him. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's we're going to trust and obey him and walk with him. We're going to sing, when we walk with the Lord, trust and obey. I've chosen this really, Elizabeth was kindly indulged me. I said I'd like to sing this song in memory of my mother, because her life was one spent walking with the Lord. She didn't, in a worldly sense, have an impressive or a great life, but she had a life that was spent walking with the Lord. A life that was a great life as a Christian. In fact, my memory of my earliest Sunday school lessons were with her as a Sunday school teacher. And so she's had, clearly over the years, had an influence on my life. And she walked with the Lord, trusted and obeyed him. She had Alzheimer's towards the end, so there is probably a point that too much study had driven her mad as well. The conversations weren't terribly clear all the time in her latter part of her life. I used to show her the videos over the past year, and she used to moan about those and say, well, can't we watch something different? But I think that was really the Alzheimer's rather than the fact that she didn't want to walk with the Lord. And it was really nice that Janet, on the last day of her life, read her some Psalms. So that's really great. She did walk with the Lord, she did trust and obey him. She used to pray with me every night when I was a child. And then in Fellowship Suite, the fact that if you live your life like that, you won't be the emperor, you won't be the governor, you won't have servants there, but you will sit at his feet, or we walk by his side in the way. And that's what she's doing now. That's the promise for all of our futures. If we accept that we're going to walk with the Lord, that walk will continue.